Shocking new details about why a woman may have allegedly killed her partner and baby. According to a new report from the LA Times, Danielle Johnson was an influencer with 100,000 followers on X, formerly Twitter, who mostly talked about astrology online. The report goes on to say she made posts saying she was worried about the eclipse and called it, quote, the epitome of spiritual warfare. In the hours before the eclipse, police say she stabbed her partner to death in their Woodland Hills apartment, then pushed her two daughters out of her car.
At 4:30 on the morning of April 8, 2024, drivers on Interstate 405 slowed for something no one expected to see. Two children were in the roadway, one 9 years old and the other a baby. The older girl had been injured, but she reached the shoulder while her infant sister remained exposed to traffic. Motorists called 911, but the baby did not survive. 30 minutes later, a Porsche Cayenne traveling at more than 100 miles per hour struck a curb near Pacific Coast Highway, and Vincent Street became airborne and crashed into a tree. The 34-year-old driver died at the scene, and police did not yet know she was connected to the children. More than 2 hours later, residents at a Woodland Hills apartment complex noticed that a neighbor's door was wide open. Blood marked the entrance and continued toward the elevator. Inside, they found 29-year-old Jalen Allen Cheney face down and unresponsive. By the end of that morning, detectives realized all three scenes belonged to the same family. The woman in the Porsche was Danielle Cherokee Johnson, an online astrologer known to more than 100,000 followers as Danielle Ayoka. 3 days earlier, she had posted, wake up, the apocalypse is here." But this story had not started with the eclipse. It had been building for years. But before we begin, if you find this video interesting, please give it a like at the end and tell me what you think about the case. It really helps the channel. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more. Thank you.
29-year-old Jalen Allen Cheney in their shared Woodland Hills apartment when a heated argument turned violent early Monday morning. She then took off down the 405 with her two kids, pushing her 9-year-old daughter and infant from the moving car. The baby was killed and the little girl injured but survived. Johnson continued driving, her car going over 100 miles per hour before she crashed into a tree on PCH in Redondo Beach.
I looked at my phone and I saw that there was two kids found on the side of the 405 freeway and their ages, and I screamed. And I called my husband and my daughter up and I read them the article, and we all knew at that point it was our neighbors.
Before more than 100,000 people knew her as Danielle Ayoka, the woman behind Mystic's Lipstick had been Danielle Cherokee Johnson, born on September 25, 1989 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Her mother, Sharonda Cole, was only 16 when she became pregnant and 17 when Danielle was born, so from the beginning, their lives developed inside a family that was already under pressure. Danielle's biological father was largely absent, and Sharonda raised her with the help of her own relatives. For part of Danielle's early childhood, mother and daughter lived with Sharonda's aunt and uncle in Maryland, where Sharonda was also still being guided and supported by the older adults around her. However, the relationship between mother and daughter became more complicated as Danielle grew older. When Danielle was around 13, Sharonda was struggling with drug addiction, and Danielle was sent to live with Sharonda's brother and sister-in-law in Virginia. The home was described as more stable, but while the move may have given Danielle a safer routine, Sharonda believed it also deepened her daughter's sense of rejection. Danielle felt that her mother had chosen drugs instead of choosing her, and that belief stayed between them long after Sharonda began trying to rebuild her life. Danielle was also described as a child who was often frightened about her health. A simple headache could make her fear that she was experiencing a brain aneurysm, and ordinary physical symptoms sometimes caused her to panic. Danielle graduated from high school in 2007 and then enrolled at Norfolk State University in Virginia, where she studied psychology. She also sang in the choir and learned to play piano, but she did not complete her degree, leaving during her junior year. A college roommate named Maya later described Danielle as someone who constantly talked about her dreams, what they meant, and whether they revealed events that had not yet happened. Maya said Danielle sometimes spoke about visions of the future, but at the time, both women were practicing Christians, so Maya initially understood those conversations as part of Danielle's religious interest, rather than something alarming. Danielle later said that she had once been deeply religious, but around the age of 20, her attention began moving toward energy work, Reiki, astrology, and alternative forms of spirituality. She was not simply looking for another set of beliefs. She appeared to be searching for a way to understand intuition, emotional pain, and healing through a system she could practice for herself and eventually offer to other people. As that identity developed, Danielle also began telling a much older story about herself. She claimed that she had experienced a near-death event when she was 3 years old and said it had become her rite of passage into shamanism. Her website later stated that she descended from indigenous shamans and medicine women, although those claims were never independently confirmed. There was also an unresolved contradiction in the story. Danielle told the Fader that her father had informed her about Native American spiritual ancestry on his side of the family, but Sharonda described him as largely absent and said Danielle had little or no meaningful relationship with him. By then, however, Danielle had already gathered the pieces of the identity she would soon present to the world: psychology, dreams, intuition, energy, and healing. Then she found a platform where those interests could become more than private beliefs. They could become a business. In December 2010, Danielle created the Twitter account that would eventually separate her public identity from the life she had lived before. She used the handle at Mystics Lipstick, and although the page began as an outlet for her interests, it gradually became the foundation of a career that would reach more than 100,000 people. She also began using the professional name Danielle Ayoka. Ayoka is a Yoruba name commonly associated with joy, and it gave her growing brand a distinctive identity that followers could easily remember. At first, Danielle's posts focused heavily on Reiki, energy healing, emotional awareness, and spiritual work that she said could be performed from a distance. She described herself as a Reiki master, and later as a Reiki master teacher, while her website claimed she had trained in more than 10 alternative healing methods. Those titles helped establish her authority online, but no publicly identified licensing body, school, or credentialing organization confirmed the extent of that training. Astrology became part of Danielle's life early. She later said she began studying it at around 18, before Mystics Lipstick had become a recognized name. A friend named Steph helped answer some of her first questions, and Danielle bought books that connected astrology with psychology, personality, and social behavior. She was not only interested in birth dates and zodiac signs, she wanted to understand why people repeated certain patterns and how those patterns shaped their relationships. Then, during one of her birthdays, Danielle met an astrologer who encouraged her to take the subject more seriously. According to Danielle, the woman repeatedly told her that astrology was something she should pursue professionally. Danielle initially resisted, but she continued studying, began reading charts for friends, and eventually started charging people for her time. Her audience grew slowly at first, and then in 2015, Danielle found the format that changed everything. She began posting long threads that became known as Tea Time or Astrology Tea. And instead of offering dry explanations about planets and houses, she spoke directly to each zodiac sign as if she were confronting a friend who needed honest advice. Danielle later recalled that one early thread began with Capricorns and their tendency to fall for people they can't have. From there, the idea expanded, and followers began waiting to see which sign she would discuss next. Sometimes she allowed them to vote, and then she would go online and begin writing without preparing the thread in advance. Her Libra post opened with the line, "Okay, Libra, let's help you get your S-hit together in relationships." And when she turned to Aries, she wrote, "Aries has the sex game on lock hands down." The appeal was not only what Danielle said, but how she said it. Her posts were funny, blunt, sarcastic, and easy to understand, and she did not present herself like a distant expert speaking down to an audience. Instead, she sounded like someone sitting beside her followers. telling them what she believed they needed to hear. Danielle understood that connection, and she once described it simply, "My page is like a party." That atmosphere became part of the brand. Followers reacted in real time, argued about whether her descriptions were accurate, and tagged friends who shared the sign she was discussing. Within roughly 3 years, Danielle had built an audience of more than 50,000 followers. By April 2024, that number had grown to between 104,000 and 105,000, and had become the center of a recognizable online business. As Danielle's online following grew, her personal life was also changing, and one of the first people to know her before the brand became successful was Cecil Rice. The two met on Twitter in 2012 when Cecil came across Danielle's posts and found some of them funny, even though he had little interest in Reiki, astrology, or spiritual healing. They began exchanging messages, and after discovering that they lived near one another, they eventually decided to meet in person. Their relationship became serious, and in 2014, Danielle and Cecil married before moving to Springfield, Ohio. A year later, in 2015, they welcomed a daughter, and that child would eventually become the only person from Danielle's household to survive the events of April 2024. The birth of their daughter came at the same time that Danielle's online work was beginning to expand. Cecil later said social media had entered a period when ordinary users could suddenly turn an audience into income, and both of them were surprised by how strongly people connected with what Danielle was doing. Around that same period, Sharonda Cole returned to Danielle's life after years of distance. She met her granddaughter for the first time, and although mother and daughter still carried unresolved pain from the past, Danielle began using the language of healing to help them reconnect. Sharonda later explained, "She started working with me, trying to help me heal not just the wounds between her and I, but my wounds from my childhood." At the same time, Sharonda said Danielle was dealing with difficulties that her online audience could not see. After the birth of her first daughter, Danielle reportedly struggled with postpartum depression while also facing exhaustion, financial concerns, tension in her marriage, and anger toward both of her parents. But there were no medical records confirming whether a clinician had diagnosed or treated her. However, while Danielle's private life became more strained, her business continued growing, and she expanded from free astrology threads into products that promised direct spiritual benefits. Her services included remote energy cleanses, zodiac-specific cleanses, healing recordings, written guidance, and guided meditation. She also offered a program called Good Vibes, which she said would send positive energy into a customer's home at 7 each morning. Some products cost only a few dollars, while others were part of monthly programs priced at approximately $150. Certain zodiac cleanses reportedly sold for $11.99, and Danielle described some of the services as one-time spiritual treatments that automatically connected to a customer's aura as soon as the purchase was completed. Danielle also developed a brand known as Rich Girl Magic. It was linked to an Etsy store that reportedly recorded more than 800 sales and approximately 100 five-star reviews. The shop offered spiritual cleanses and guided products, and later, Danielle and Sharonda used the same brand while working together on candles. Danielle's website promised that she was changing reality one intention at a time. It also described her work as practical magic, healing with ancient teachings, and breaking cycles by rewriting the future. However, as the business expanded, complaints also began to appear. Some customers said Danielle became difficult to reach after receiving payment, while others felt they had not received the level of guidance they expected. The Los Angeles Times later reviewed messages that supported the existence of some of those complaints, but there was no identified fraud conviction, consumer ruling, or regulatory action against her. Danielle displayed more signs of financial success through expensive clothing, travel, lifestyle branding, and high-end vehicles. Danielle also wrote about what she called toxic nurturing, and in one blog post, she observed, "These children often grow up wanting to give others the love they never had." As Danielle's audience grew, the image she had built online began to develop cracks, and some of the first tensions appeared in the way she spoke about sexuality, identity, and belonging. In one post, she described the experience of bisexual people who felt excluded from both heterosexual and LGBTQ+ spaces, writing, "Imagine not being embraced in the LGBT community or in the straight community." The post drew criticism from some users, but Danielle later explained that she was speaking from personal experience rather than attacking the community. She wrote, "Being bisexual has been something I've been learning to navigate since I was a teen." The explanation did not end every disagreement, but it showed that Danielle was trying to place the post within her own struggle with identity and acceptance, rather than presenting herself as an outside observer. However, a more serious controversy developed in 2018, when Danielle began marketing spiritual healing services to survivors of sexual assault. She said her remote energy work could help people process the emotional pain connected to those experiences, but critics questioned whether she had the training to make such promises. They also challenged the idea of charging vulnerable people for a service that could not be measured in the same way as counseling, medical care, or trauma-informed treatment. Danielle responded by saying that she was also a survivor. She described experiencing prolonged sexual abuse during childhood and reportedly identified several people she said had been involved, including a relative, a teenage girl, and a close friend. Her mother, Sharonda, later said Danielle had never disclosed that history to her, and that absence left Sharonda uncertain about the claim. But Sharonda was not the only person who knew Danielle during those years. Danielle's former roommate, Maya, and her husband, Cecil Rice, both remembered Danielle speaking about childhood abuse before the 2018 controversy. As those questions followed her, former followers began describing another side of Danielle's spiritual work. Some alleged that she used cow tongues, feathers, photographs, and nails in rituals directed at critics or people she believed had crossed her. Others claimed she spoke about curses and communication with demons. Those stories later became part of the darker public narrative surrounding Danielle. At home, Danielle's marriage was also coming to an end. She and Cecil separated in 2018 after approximately 4 years of marriage. Cecil did not describe the separation as the result of one dramatic event, and he later said, "We did great as friends, decent as co-parents." According to him, they had grown apart and wanted different things from life. After the separation, Danielle moved to New York City with their daughter. She was in a stronger financial position than Cecil and had full custody of the child. By 2020, Danielle had entered a new relationship with a novelist and tarot card reader. The two became engaged, and Danielle later relocated to Los Angeles with her daughter and fiancé. However, the relationship eventually ended. During that same period, Danielle attempted to build a second public career through music. Using Ayoka as her stage name, she pursued an alternative R&B sound and reportedly released a project called Venus. She promoted the songs, shared music videos, and tried to introduce her astrology followers to a different version of herself. Danielle appeared to have real confidence in the project, but the audience that responded to her spiritual content did not follow her into music in the numbers she expected. Her YouTube audience was at approximately 150 to 170 subscribers, while her SoundCloud account attracted a little more than 200 followers. The music career never developed into the large platform Danielle appeared to be pursuing. So she gradually returned her attention to astrology, healing, and the audience she already understood. However, the tone of that audience relationship had started to change. Danielle's posts increasingly moved beyond zodiac signs and emotional healing and into COVID-related conspiracies, vaccine claims, political theories, and anti-Semitic material. Some of the ideas contradicted one another, but Danielle continued sharing them, sometimes treating each new theory as urgent or revealing. Followers who had once known her as funny, encouraging, and direct began stepping away. One longtime follower later said Danielle's energy felt darker and that she no longer seemed well.
Now, Johnson was also a recording artist, she said, according to another account that she managed. And she had an Etsy store where, under the handle of Rich Girl Magic, she sold audio recordings of her voice for healing and astrological readings. And inside her apartment, we're told, dozens of tarot card decks, candles, religious figurines, feathers, altars were all.
Then, near the end of 2020, Danielle began speaking regularly with someone new. He was not an online rival or a former customer complaining about a service. He was a customer who believed in her, and before long, Jalen Allen Chaney would begin changing his life to be with her. He was born on May 20th, 1994, grew up in Michigan, and later moved to Florida for high school, where he became part of a Christian youth group and formed friendships that would continue into adulthood. After high school, Jalen joined the United States Air Force, and his military career eventually took him far from the communities where he had grown up. He served as an armament or munitions technician and was connected to the 31st Munitions Squadron, which placed him at Aviano Air Base in northeastern Italy. The work gave him the opportunity to travel, and by the time he met Danielle, he had already built a life that included military discipline, international experience, and a wide range of interests that did not fit neatly into one category. Jalen loved Star Wars, but he was also curious about subjects that Danielle discussed regularly online. His social media interests included horoscopes, tarot, radio communication, extraterrestrial intelligence, spiritual metaphysics, and expanded consciousness. Jalen first encountered Danielle through her website or one of her online stores, and their initial connection appeared to have been commercial rather than romantic. He bought candles, healing products, and other spiritual services, so in the beginning, he was one of the many people who approached Danielle because they believed she might offer guidance or help them understand something in their lives. Then they began talking beyond the purchase. The conversations became longer, and Danielle started sharing more of herself with him. Sharonda later said Jalen would listen to her daughter for hours while he was still stationed in Italy, and she described him as an emotional soldier for her. Their relationship gradually moved from business into friendship, then from friendship into emotional dependence, and, eventually, a long-distance romance. Then Danielle traveled to Italy to meet him in person, and when Jalen returned to the United States on military leave, she traveled to spend time with him. And as Jalen became more involved with Danielle, he also moved deeper into the spiritual world she had built. He began identifying himself as a Reiki master, and in 2021, he created a business called Saturn's Guidance, LLC. His website offered spiritual baths, energy work, timeline shifts, and services associated with what he described as quantum healing. Then Danielle promoted an online coven during this period. She taught followers how to work with spells, create sigils, and use magical symbols, while Jalen was given the title of High Priest. Sharonda also said Danielle came to believe that she and Jalen were twin flames, a spiritual idea built around two people being deeply connected or mirroring one another. According to Sharonda, Danielle used rituals, tantra, sexual magic, and spell work because she believed those practices could strengthen the relationship and secure the bond between them. However, there was a more sensitive part of Jalen's personal history. Jalen had previously identified as gay and had dated men before becoming involved with Danielle. But Danielle challenged his understanding of his sexuality and told him that childhood trauma had caused him to believe he was gay, while she believed he was supposed to be with her. Sharonda later described the way Danielle allegedly monitored Jalen's behavior, saying, "She was always scanning him, saying, 'Oh, that was gay of you to say. Why did you say that?' Sharonda then added, "It came down to her needing to snuff out every whiff of his higher self." What was clear was that the relationship became serious enough for Jalen to make a major decision. He chose not to re-enlist in the Air Force, left the life he had built overseas, and moved to Los Angeles during the summer of 2022. He moved into Danielle's home, where Sharonda and Danielle's half-brother were also living at the time. From the outside, the decision could look like the natural next step in a long-distance relationship. Jalen and Danielle had shared interests, had spent months speaking across continents and had already met in person. He was leaving the military. She had an established business, and both appeared to believe they were building something permanent. That impression was reinforced when Jenna Butler met them in Orlando in 2022. She had lunch with the couple and later said, "I didn't see anything off when I met her. It was just normal couple stuff." There was no obvious warning in that meeting. Danielle appeared pleasant, Jalen appeared committed, and the pair looked like two people discussing a future together. But once Jalen moved into the home, the relationship was becoming harder for Jalen to leave. In May 2022, while Jalen was still deciding what to do after the Air Force, Danielle pressured him to lock his Twitter account. She told him that her enemies were trying to reach him through social media and place a curse on him. However, social media was not the only connection that became a source of conflict. Danielle also accused Jalen's mother of using black magic to interfere with their relationship. According to family accounts, Danielle became angry when Jalen wanted to contact his mother, and she repeatedly questioned her intentions. She made communication difficult by treating Jalen's family as a spiritual threat. So arguments became more frequent, and they did not always end when the shouting stopped. Danielle allegedly threw objects and damaged items around the home, and during one confrontation, she broke a drinking glass while Jalen was considering leaving. According to Sharonda, Danielle then threatened to swallow the broken pieces if he walked away. In November 2022, Jalen sent a message to his brother, Matthew Shirikus. He wrote, "I have been dealing a lot personally with my girlfriend that I don't care to really share right now because it's not appropriate." Then, during a FaceTime call, Jalen asked Sharonda whether he should walk away from her and the entire situation. Sharonda told him, "Trust your intuition." Danielle learned what Sharonda had said, and she responded by forcing her mother and half-brother out of the home. After leaving, Sharonda spent approximately 2 years moving through homeless shelters in Los Angeles, while her contact with Danielle became almost non-existent. On August 31st, 2023, Danielle and Jalen welcomed a daughter named Soli Loon Steele. The couple later moved with Sol and Danielle's older daughter into a high-end fourth-floor apartment in Woodland Hills, where they appeared to be beginning a new phase of family life away from Sharonda and the relatives who had questioned their relationship. By the beginning of 2024, Sharonda no longer knew what was being said or happening inside her daughter's home. However, Danielle was still speaking publicly, and the messages appearing on her social media page were becoming much harder to ignore. By 2024, astrology and encouragement still appeared on the account, but they now sat beside vaccine conspiracies, claims about the origins of COVID-19, anti-Semitic material, QAnon-related ideas, and repeated warnings about spiritual enemies. Some theories appeared to contradict others, and followers who had watched Danielle for years were no longer certain whether she believed every claim, was using dark humor, or was going through a personal crisis. One former follower later said, "It didn't feel right in my spirit. I am a Christian, and I felt her energy was really dark. She was opening up doors that you shouldn't walk through, and she didn't seem very well." Danielle also made posts connecting unrelated public events to spiritual or political forces. She blamed the deaths of penguins in Antarctica and chickens in the United States on people practicing black magic. She also connected an earthquake in New York to white supremacy and described disagreements within the online spiritual community as part of an energy war, with critics and rival accounts placed on the opposing side.
I would say astrology is basically the interpretation of the energies of the planets at the time that you were born or in like the current moment. So obviously nobody's like, yeah, the literal Pluto is defining this right now. It's the energy that Pluto represents. It's the energy that Pluto like invokes in us. So the easiest way that I like to describe it is that like with the moon, you know, the moon controls the tide. The moon controls people's emotions. Like when there's a full moon, there's higher crime rates, there's more births. eclipses, there's more births, there's more deaths. So, we are made of like over 70% water. And so with that, like the energies of the planets that they represent pull in our energies to form us a certain way, almost like a cookie cutter shape. And that's how you get your birth chart. And then like, that's also how like the collective energy is formed like every day with like the transits, like, so where all the planets are like, the sign, and then like, whatever degree they're in, et cetera, et cetera. So it's basically that. I feel like, there is definitely like a physiological effect of the planets, just like we have, benefits from the sun, and there's things that happen to us from the sun and from the moon. The other planets play into that as well that are in our orbit.
As the April 8th, 2024 solar eclipse approached, her posts became more urgent. On April 4th, Danielle wrote, "This eclipse is the epitome of spiritual warfare. Get your protection on and your heart in the right place. The world is very obviously changing right now, and if you ever needed to pick a side, the time to do right in your life is now. Stay strong, you got this."
This happening hours before Monday's eclipse.
I mean, she was warning people. She was saying, pick a side. The way that she typed about it was in all caps. And you could tell by her actions that it wasn't just a ploy to get attention or, drive up her followers or whatever, the streams or whatever she was looking for. It looked like she was very disturbed.
Then, on April 5th, she pinned a much more alarming post to the top of her page. It read, wake up, the apocalypse is here. Everyone who has ears listen. Your time to choose what you believe is now. If you believe a new world is possible for the people, art now. There is power in choice. There is power in choice. Repost to make the choice for the collective.
Her name was Danielle Johnson, but to her over 103,000 followers on social media, the 34-year-old was known as a yoka, a mystic and an astrologer, seen here on the Scotty and Sylvia show. In the week leading up to her death, Johnson had been posting constantly about the upcoming eclipse, warning her followers that they needed to choose a side, talking about the apocalypse and that something big was going to happen. She also shared conspiracy theories and anti-Semitic posts. Investigators analyzing the social media posts.
Shortly after midnight on April 8th, 2024, neighbors at the Woodland Hills apartment complex began hearing Danielle and Jalen arguing inside the fourth-floor home they shared with the children. The couple had been heard disagreeing before, but this time the voices were louder, the disturbance lasted longer, and sometime around 3:40 that morning, one neighbor heard what sounded like a woman and a child screaming. No one outside the apartment knew what had caused the argument, and no call for help came from inside. However, when investigators later entered the home, the condition of the room showed that the confrontation had moved well beyond raised voices. Furniture and other objects had been displaced or broken. Blood patterns were visible inside the apartment, and several parts of Jalen's body showed signs that a struggle had taken place before the final injury. He had abrasions and bruises on his face, back, arms, left hand, and lower lip. At some point, Danielle picked up a kitchen knife and caused a single injury to Jalen's chest. Her 9-year-old daughter was present, and she later told investigators that she saw her mother attack him. The confrontation began in the living room, and Jalen managed to move toward the bedroom before collapsing. Jalen ended up face down on the apartment floor, surrounded by blood. The scene also contained several objects that immediately attracted attention. First responders noticed an item beside Jalen's head that they believed might be connected to a religious practice, and similar objects were placed elsewhere in the apartment. Officers also found candles and unusual cards that did not resemble standard playing cards, although Lieutenant Guy Golan said he could not confirm whether they were tarot cards. Those details quickly led people online to describe the apartment as the scene of a ritual, but investigators never established that Danielle had placed those items around Jalen after the confrontation. After leaving Jalen inside the apartment, Danielle gathered her 9-year-old daughter and 7-month-old Soleil and placed them in her Porsche Cayenne. She then drove out of the complex at speed, breaking through the security gate as she left. The apartment door remained open behind her, and the blood that had moved beyond the doorway would later draw the neighbors' attention. By approximately 4:30 a.m., Danielle had reached the northbound side of Interstate 405 near Westchester and Howard Hughes Parkway. The older child was sitting in the passenger seat while holding Sol on her lap. Danielle then opened the passenger side door and told the 9-year-old to take the baby and get out of the moving vehicle. The child was frightened and refused, but Danielle then forced both girls through the open door while the Porsche was still moving. So the older girl landed in the middle of the roadway while still holding Soleil, and the force of the fall injured her and caused her to lose her grip on the baby. Vehicles were still traveling through the area, so the 9-year-old began moving toward the side of the freeway while trying to avoid the traffic around her. Lieutenant Golan later explained, "In a race to get out of the freeway and not get hit by traffic, the 9-year-old managed to get to the shoulder successfully. Sol remained farther inside the roadway and was struck by a passing vehicle. Motorists stopped when they realized that 2 children were on the freeway, and members of the public tried to help before calling 911. Emergency responders transported the older girl to hospital with injuries and broken bones. Sol was examined at the scene, but her injuries were too severe for her to recover. But Danielle did not return to the children, and she did not stop elsewhere to contact police or ask for help. Instead, she continued south toward Redondo Beach, putting more distance between the Porsche and the freeway while traveling at speeds reported to be above 100 miles per hour. At approximately 5 a.m., she reached the area near Pacific Coast Highway and Vincent Street, close to St. James Catholic Church. The Porsche struck a curb, left the roadway, and became airborne before colliding with a tree. The impact threw Danielle from the vehicle. When emergency crews arrived, they found her outside the damaged Porsche, lying motionless and unresponsive, with injuries to her head that were beyond medical intervention. She could not be revived.
Confirms this was a murder-suicide. Police say after a verbal altercation, a woman stabbed her partner inside this Woodland Hills apartment complex. The victim's family tells us he was an Air Force mechanic and a loving father to their 2 children. Now, his homicide is connected to 2 other fatalities, all within the same family. A shocking scenario of twists and turns ultimately ends in tremendous tragedy. LAPD confirms 34-year-old Danielle Johnson stabbed and killed 29-year-old Jalen Allen Cheney in their shared Woodland Hills apartment when a heated argument turned violent early Monday morning. She then took off down the 405 with her 2 kids, pushing her 9-year-old daughter and infant from the moving car. The baby was killed and the little girl injured but survived. Johnson continued driving, her car going over 100 miles per hour before she crashed into a tree on PCH in Redondo Beach.
At that point, the officers in Redondo Beach did not know that Danielle had come from an apartment in Woodland Hills, and the emergency workers on Interstate 405 did not yet know the identity of the woman who had driven away from the children.
New at 10 tonight, we've learned that the suspect in this week's horrific murder-suicide was an online astrology influencer. Here's a look at her, who posted about the solar eclipse being the apocalypse. Fox 11's Gina Silva, she's live with developing new information on this case tonight. Gina?
Marla, this case has been so shocking from beginning to end, and now we're learning about a new disturbing layer to this tragedy.
A lot of our foundations as a society are toxic. They're ungrounded and they're unrealistic.
LAPD confirms Danielle Johnson, a.k.a. Danielle Ayoka, seen here on the Scotty and Sylvia show, was an astrology influencer on social media who was concerned about the eclipse.
Eclipses, there's more births, there's more deaths.
Leading up to the eclipse on Monday, Danielle, who went by the handle Mystic X Lipstick, made several alarming posts like these. Wake up, the apocalypse is here. And the eclipse is the epitome of spiritual warfare. She also reposted alerts that signaled this is the final warning. Something big is coming.
This type of story is probably one of the most tragic and horrifying stories that we'll ever hear about.
Back at the apartment complex, more than 2 hours passed before the final scene was discovered. At approximately 7:35 a.m., neighbors noticed that Danielle and Jalen's door was wide open. Blood was visible near the entrance, along the hallway, and toward the elevator. So Richard Berglund contacted emergency services and was instructed to check whether anyone inside still needed help. Richard entered the apartment carefully, stepping around the blood and displaced furniture, until he found Jalen lying face down and completely unresponsive. He wore only socks and underwear, and nothing about his condition suggested that medical assistance could still help him.
I looked at my phone and I saw that there was 2 kids found on the side of the 405 freeway and their ages, and I screamed. And I called my husband and my daughter up, and I read them the article, and we all knew at that point it was our neighbors. It was obvious.
The couple's next-door neighbors woke up to a trail of blood leading from the apartment to the elevator and immediately called for help.
Their front door was wide open. It was like propped open. And I saw pretty much it was in disarray in there. I mean, the knocked over furniture and blood.
I told them it was a 3-story. The bedrooms were downstairs, and stood there as they said, "I see a body down." And they pulled their guns and said, "If anyone's in there, come out with your hands up."
Richard and Jody Berglund didn't know the couple personally. According to family, Jalen was in the Air Force, served 4 years in Italy, where he likely met Danielle. He was an aspiring meteorologist. His brother tells KTLA he didn't know the details of the couple's relationship. As for his daughter, she's being treated for her injuries at UCLA. She's the sole survivor and likely the primary witness to a series of unimaginable events.
Knowing that that poor child saw what she had to see and experienced what she had to experience on the side of the freeway, and, losing her mother the way she's now lost her mother, and probably the last memory she have of her mother is not going to be great. And I just can't. That is going to haunt me forever.
By then, Jalen, Sol, and Danielle were gone, and the only surviving member of the household was the 9-year-old girl receiving treatment at the hospital.
Just hours before the eclipse was to take place over California, Danielle stabbed her boyfriend to death in Woodland Hills, pushed her kids out of a moving car on the 405 freeway in the Westchester area, which resulted in the death of her 8-month-old baby and the injury of her 9-year-old daughter. Then Danielle died after crashing her Porsche into a tree in Redondo Beach.
Perhaps she thought that this eclipse meant that it was the end of the world. The apocalypse was here, especially because of some of the statements that she made.
There were plenty of similar posts and videos on social media predicting all kinds of disasters and the end of the world.
And when you're sitting on TikTok or you're on social media, and clearly she was an influencer, so she watched a lot of this stuff, it's very easy to get sucked into the fear that these videos start to create.
Could this have been postpartum depression?
I don't think it would have been totally postpartum depression, because we have a lot of women who deal with postpartum depression and it doesn't result in something like this. But certainly any type of mood disorder makes it much harder to cope with other things as they start to come up.
Looking at this tragedy in hindsight, Dr. Swanson says there were obvious signs. The happy and smiling Danielle had changed and was struggling with something dark.
She was warning people. She was saying, pick a side. The way that she typed about it was in all caps. It looked like she was very disturbed.
Police now had 3 scenes spread across Los Angeles County: a damaged apartment, a Porsche, 2 deceased family members, and 1 child who had survived long enough to explain part of what happened.
Yeah, Colleen, Danielle Johnson had a very large presence on social media. She had over 100,000 followers, and she posted about her fears about the eclipse and the apocalypse. But neighbors here at the Montecito apartments where she lived says here she was very much keeping to herself. She barely said hi to anyone. NBC4's I-Team has confirmed that Danielle Johnson was also known as Danielle Ayoka online. Under this alias, Johnson made several disturbing posts. Some were anti-Semitic. Others warned about the solar eclipse, calling it the epitome of spiritual warfare. Hours before the solar eclipse on Monday, police say Johnson went on a rampage, killing her partner and throwing her children into traffic on the 405, and then crashing her car into a tree on PCH.
Horrible. I mean, just the whole thing.
Anita Mezar lived on the same floor as Johnson and her family.
I only saw her one time. I came out of my apartment and she was there with the stroller with the little baby. The baby wasn't even a year old.
That 8-month-old baby was in the arms of Johnson's 9-year-old daughter when police say Johnson pushed them out of her moving car on the 405. The 9-year-old managed to get to the side of the freeway. The baby was hit by a car.
But the person investigators most needed to question would never be able to answer them. Jalen's family was left with the emotional cost of bringing him home.
She's insane. Yeah, that she had mental problems. To do what she did, the way that she did it, yeah, it's just awful.
Anita and other neighbors now poring over Johnson's social media posts.
I don't know if you've gone to her Twitter or X page, but we didn't realize how mentally unstable she was. A lot of anti-Semitic remarks.
Norman and others say Johnson and the family kept to themselves.
She was just very standoffish. When we walk our dog, she just wouldn't say hi.
But never imagined she was capable of what police say she did. So many in the building, Norman says, haunted by what happened on Monday.
Friends of ours heard pleading, blood-curdling screams, pleading for his life.
Online, Johnson described herself as a recording artist and an astrologer and sold healing sessions and products. Johnson was killed when her car crashed into a tree in Redondo Beach. Police say she was going over 100 miles per hour.
If only people in this situation would simply either get help or if they would just not take others out with them.
A fundraiser reportedly sought help with transportation, burial arrangements, memorial expenses, family travel, and other financial needs. Jalen would have turned 30 on May 20th, 2024. He and Soleil were laid to rest at Great Lakes National Cemetery in Michigan on that date. The surviving 9-year-old lost her mother, her infant sister Jalen, and the home life she had known. And that's where this case comes to a close. What do you think about everything that happened? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story stayed with you, there are more cases on the channel that explore situations just as disturbing. Make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and share the video. It helps keep stories like this from fading away. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.